There is a fascinating pattern we see in the people who change the world, build enduring institutions, and weather the worst storms without breaking. We look at them and often call it talent or luck or some rare genetic wiring. But it is none of those things. What we are actually looking at is a deep fundamental understanding of human biology and purpose. Think about how we are wired. For most of human history, survival meant avoiding discomfort, conserving energy, and running away from friction. Our brains are literally designed to whisper to us a stop. This is too hard, rest. And in isolation, listening to that voice makes sense, except the people who win, the ones who build unbreakable resilience, realize something profound. They realize that friction is not a sign to stop. Friction is the very mechanism of growth. When a muscle grows, it has to break down. When a mind expands, it has to face confusion. Mental toughness is not about having an absence of fear or an infinite well of motivation. Motivation is a fickle emotion. It arrives when the sun is shining and vanishes the moment a storm rolls in. Mentally tough people do not rely on motivation. They rely on clarity. They start with why. They understand the deep emotional root of what they're fighting for. When you know why you are in the arena, every obstacle shifts from being a wall that blocks your path to a puzzle that tests your commitment. Consider the difference between someone who quits when things fall apart and someone who leans in. The one who quits sees failure as an identity. I am a failure. The mentally tough see failure as data. That strategy didn't work. What do I need to learn? They separate who they are from what just happened. They strip the emotion away from the setback and ask the most powerful question imaginable. What is this trying to teach me? When you build that kind of resilience, quitting stops being an option because your vision of the future is far louder than the pain of the present moment. You stop looking at the mountain and asking, why is this so high? Instead, you look at your feet and take the next step. That is how you keep winning, not by never falling down, but by refusing to stay down, knowing that every single time you stand back up, you become harder to break. 5 keynotes of the speech, friction is growth. Recognize that physical and mental discomfort are not signs to quit, but the biological requirements for building strength and resilience. Motivation vs. clarity, abandon fleeting motivation, and instead anchor yourself to a deep, purposeful why that keeps you moving forward when conditions turn difficult. Failure as data, separate your personal identity from your setbacks, treating mistakes and failures as objective feedback rather than proof of inadequacy. The power of the next step, focus entirely on immediate, manageable progress instead of overwhelming yourself with the scale of the ultimate mountain. The art of persistence, build unbreakable consistency by treating every obstacle as a temporary puzzle designed to test and sharpen your long-term commitment. There is a fundamental misunderstanding deeply embedded in how most of us approach difficulty, discomfort, and resistance in our lives. From the moment we are young, we are conditioned to believe that ease is the ultimate destination. We look for the path of least resistance, the shortcut, the hack, the seamless experience where everything flows smoothly without friction. When things get hard, when a project stalls, when a workout burns, or when a goal demands more than we feel we have to give, our immediate biological and psychological response is to pull back. We interpret that friction as a warning sign. We tell ourselves that if it is this hard, it must mean we are on the wrong path, that we are not cut out for it, or that we need to stop before we break. But if you study the individuals who build unbreakable resilience and refuse to give up, you realize they operate on an entirely different operating system. They look at the exact same friction, the exact same discomfort, and the exact same resistance, and they interpret it not as a stop sign, but as the engine of transformation itself. To understand how mentally tough people never give up, you first have to understand the biological and psychological reality of how growth actually happens in the universe. Nothing worthwhile comes into existence without a struggle against resistance. Consider the physical world for a moment. If you want to build muscle, you cannot simply wish for strength or visualize yourself looking fit. You have to take a muscle fiber and intentionally subject it to a weight heavy enough to cause microscopic tears. That process hurts. It induces inflammation, soreness, and temporary weakness. If a person did not understand how biology works, they would experience that post-workout soreness and assume they were destroying their body, prompting them to avoid exercise forever. Yet we all know that the breakdown is the exact mechanism required for the muscle to rebuild itself stronger, denser, and more resilient than it was before. The friction of the heavy weight is literally what forces the biological adaptation. The exact same law governs our minds, our emotional capacities, and our professional lives, yet we treat mental friction as if it were a fatal flaw. When a leader faces a massive crisis, when an entrepreneur watches their business model collapse, or when an individual has to confront uncomfortable truths about their own habits, the brain experiences an intense surge of cognitive and emotional stress. That stress feels heavy, exhausting, and overwhelming. The untrained mind reacts to that heaviness by retreating into comfort, seeking distraction, or abandoning the pursuit altogether. The mentally tough mind, however, recognizes this exact moment for what it truly is, the psychological equivalent of lifting heavy weight. They understand that if a challenge is easy, it is not stretching their capacity. If a situation does not force them to confront their limitations, it is not expanding their boundaries. They have internalized the profound truth that discomfort is the birthplace of capability. This perspective shift changes everything about how you experience daily life. When you stop viewing hardship as an interruption to your journey and start viewing it as the actual substance of the journey, your relationship with suffering transforms. You stop asking the universe to make things easier and instead start asking yourself to become stronger, sharper, and more capable. Think about the nature of a kite. A kite does not rise with the wind, it rises against it. Without the resistance of the wind pushing down against the fabric while the string holds it in tension, the kite simply falls flat to the ground. The very force that feels like it is pushing against the kite is the exact force that lifts it into the sky. Mentally tough people are human kites. They do not wish for a world without wind, without headwinds, or without obstacles. They understand that those very headwinds are what provide the lift necessary to achieve altitude. When you embrace friction as growth, your entire threshold for stress expands. You begin to notice that situations which used to send you into a spiral of anxiety or avoidance no longer hold that kind of power over you. You have walked through the fire enough times to know that the fire does not consume you, it refines you. You realize that every time you wanted to quit but chose to take one more step anyway, you were forging a new neurological pathway of resilience. You are teaching your nervous system that discomfort is survivable, that uncertainty is manageable, and that pressure is simply the precursor to breakthrough. This is why people with unbreakable resilience appear almost eerily calm in the middle of chaos. It is not because they do not feel the pressure or because they lack fear. It is because they have reframed the pressure entirely. They know that every difficult conversation they force themselves to have, every complex problem they stare down instead of walking away from, and every failure they digest without self-pity is actively upgrading their internal software. They are building a mind that can carry heavier loads without buckling under the weight. Therefore, when you find yourself in a season of intense pressure, when the work is tedious, the timeline is brutal, and the obstacles seem to multiply faster than you can solve them, remember that you are not failing simply because you are struggling. In fact, if you are not struggling, you are likely standing still. The friction you feel is the friction of expansion. It is the feeling of your old limit stretching to accommodate a new, larger version of yourself. Lean into that resistance instead of running away from it. Welcome the heavy weights, embrace the difficult conversations, and sit with the uncomfortable uncertainty of the unknown, knowing deep in your bones that every single ounce of resistance you push against is building the unyielding strength that will keep you winning long after everyone else has walked away. There is a silent killer of human potential that operates every single day. Disguised as harmless optimism or temporary fatigue, that killer is the reliance on motivation. We live in a culture that has become utterly addicted to the feeling of being inspired. We consume endless videos, read countless quotes, and wait for that sudden surge of adrenaline and enthusiasm to convince us that today is the day we will change our lives. We treat motivation like a magical fuel source, believing that if our tank is full, we can drive anywhere. But if the gauge drops to empty, we have a valid excuse to pull over to the side of the road and turn off the engine. But if you study the individuals who never give up, the ones who achieve extraordinary and enduring success over decades rather than weeks, you discover a startling truth. They do not care about motivation. In fact, they often operate effectively in the complete absence of it. They understand that motivation is an emotion, and like all emotions, it is fundamentally fickle, unstable, and entirely unreliable. It arrives uninvited when the sun is shining, when the coffee is fresh, and when the circumstances feel aligned. But it vanishes into thin air the exact moment a cold wind blows, a deadline looms, or a setback drains our emotional reserves. If you build your life on a foundation of motivation, you are building your house on shifting sand, guaranteed to collapse the first time a genuine storm rolls in. The mentally tough do not anchor themselves to feelings, they anchor themselves to clarity and specifically to a deep, unshakable, and emotionally resonant why. To truly grasp this distinction, you have to look past the surface level of what people do and examine the biological and neurological mechanics of human drive. The human brain is a brilliant, energy-conserving machine designed for one primary purpose: survival. When you wake up on a freezing morning, when you stare at a mountain of difficult tasks, or when you face a daunting challenge that requires hours of tedious, painful execution, your brain immediately runs a cost-benefit analysis. It calculates the energy required versus the immediate reward, and it whispers a very convincing argument. This is uncomfortable. Why are we doing this? Let's stay in bed, or let's do something easier. If your only defense against that internal voice is a fleeting sense of motivation, you will lose that argument every single time. Motivation is a surface-level spark. It cannot survive a prolonged internal debate against the powerful biological urge for comfort and safety. Clarity, however, bypasses the debate entirely. Clarity is anchored in a profound understanding of the deeper purpose behind your actions. It is the difference between a person who goes to the gym because they want to look good for a vacation next month and a person who goes because they are fiercely committed to being strong enough, healthy enough, and vibrant enough to watch their children grow up and carry their own grandchildren one day. Notice the difference in psychological weight. The person chasing a short-term aesthetic goal will lose their motivation the moment they miss a workout, eat a piece of cake, or realize results are taking longer than expected. Their why is fragile, shallow, and entirely dependent on external validation. But the person whose why is rooted in a deep, undeniable responsibility to their family, their mission, or their core identity does not need motivation. When the alarm goes off at 5 in the morning and their body aches for sleep, they do not ask themselves if they feel like getting up. They do not look for an injection of inspiration. They simply remember who they are doing it for. The clarity of their purpose acts as an absolute command, overriding the temporary protest of their physical body and pulling them out of bed with a quiet, undeniable resolve. When you possess this level of deep clarity, the entire landscape of your daily effort changes. The obstacles that used to derail you, the critics, the slow progress, the tedious administrative work, the unexpected failures, lose their paralyzing grip. They no longer feel like personal attacks or insurmountable walls. They simply become friction points on a map you are completely committed to navigating. You stop looking for hacks, shortcuts, or external cheerleaders to push you forward because the engine driving you is internal and inexhaustible. It burns quietly, steadily, providing a consistent, unwavering heat long after the bright, flashy fires of motivation have burned out into cold ash. This is why people who possess true resilience appear almost immune to burnout in the traditional sense. Burnout typically happens when someone is expending massive amounts of energy, running after goals they do not truly understand or value, relying entirely on synthetic motivation to fake enthusiasm for a path that lacks soul. When your actions are aligned with a crystal clear purpose, the work, no matter how hard, heavy, or repetitive it becomes, feeds your spirit rather than draining it. You realize that every difficult task, every painful sacrifice, and every lonely hour spent refining your craft is an investment in a future that matters deeply to you. Therefore, if you find yourself constantly struggling to stay consistent, if you find yourself perpetually waiting for the right mood, the right moment, or the right dose of inspiration to take action, you are looking in the wrong place. Stop searching for motivation. Stop consuming content designed to give you a temporary emotional high. Instead, sit down in absolute silence and interrogate your own life until you find the real, unfiltered reason why you are fighting in the first place. Dig past the surface desires of status, comfort, and applause until you hit the bedrock of your core values, your deepest responsibilities, and your truest commitments. Write that reason down, engrave it into your mind, and return to it every single time the friction of life tempts you to quit. When your why is clear enough, loud enough, and true enough, the how becomes secondary, comfort becomes irrelevant, and quitting becomes entirely impossible. You will keep moving forward not because you feel like it, but because, with every fiber of your being, that you have nowhere else to go. There is a moment that comes to every single person who strives for something meaningful, a moment where a project collapses, a deal falls through, a relationship ends, or a public effort misses the mark entirely. In that precise instant, a heavy, suffocating wave of emotion washes over us, and our mind immediately offers a very specific, devastating interpretation of what just happened. It whispers a sentence that has destroyed more potential than any lack of skill or resources ever could. It tells us, you failed, therefore you are a failure. We take an external event, an objective outcome in the physical world, and we absorb it directly into our core identity. We treat a mistake as a mirror reflecting our ultimate worth, wrapping ourselves in shame, embarrassment, and self-doubt. We decide that if the outcome was bad, we must be broken, inadequate, or fundamentally unequipped for the journey. But if you study the individuals who possess unbreakable resilience and refuse to give up, you discover that they operate with a psychological firewall that protects their identity from their outcomes. They understand a foundational truth that changes everything about how they navigate the world. They know that failure is not an identity, failure is simply data. To truly grasp this, you have to look at how a scientist approaches an experiment in a laboratory. When a scientist spends months formulating a hypothesis, sets up complex equipment, runs an intricate test, and watches the entire apparatus blow up or yield numbers that completely contradict what they hope to see, what do? Do they sit on the floor of the lab, throw their hands in the air, and declare themselves to be a terrible human being? Do they question their worth, cry over their inadequacy, and vow never to think again? Of course not. That would be absurd. The scientist steps back, takes notes, looks at the ruined equipment with a sense of clinical curiosity and says, well, that hypothesis was incorrect. The data is telling us that variable X reacted differently than we anticipated. Let's adjust the parameters, fix the formula, and run it again. To a scientist, a negative result is never an emotional judgment. It is simply valuable, objective information. It is a signpost telling them what doesn't work so they can get closer to what does. Mentally tough people treat their entire lives like a laboratory. When they launch an initiative that fails to gain traction, when they face rejection, or when they make a massive miscalculation that costs them time and money, they do not personalize the blow. They strip away the emotion, detach their ego from the outcome, and look at the event through a lens of pure curiosity. This separation of self from circumstance requires an immense amount of intentional discipline because our evolutionary wiring desperately wants us to take everything personally. For our ancestors, making a social or physical mistake meant ostracization from the tribe, which meant certain death. Our brains learned to associate failure with mortal danger, triggering a massive surge of cortisol and adrenaline that makes rejection feel like a physical wound. When a modern human experiences a professional setback, their nervous system reacts as if they are being hunted. They feel that tight constriction in the chest, the sudden heat in the face, and the overwhelming urge to hide or lash out. The mentally tough person feels that exact same biological surge, but instead of letting the panic drive the car, They pause. They acknowledge the physical discomfort of the setback without surrendering their mind to it. They ask themselves a transformative question that completely alters the trajectory of the moment. What is this event trying to tell me? They do not look backward with regret, wishing they had never tried. They look forward with analytical precision, mining the wreckage for the exact lessons hidden inside the mistake. Consider how this shifts the emotional weight of adversity. When failure is viewed as an identity, every mistake feels like a permanent scar that disfigures your character, making you terrified to ever step back into the arena. But when failure is viewed as data, every mistake becomes an asset, a piece of hard-earned intelligence that actually increases your market value and your internal capacity. Think about the greatest innovators, entrepreneurs, and leaders in history. None of them achieved mastery by gliding smoothly from one success to another on a pristine highway of perfection. Every single one of them accumulated a mountain of miscalculations, rejected proposals, flawed strategies, and painful public blunders. The difference between them and the people who quit is not that they failed less, it is that they interpreted their failures differently. While everyone else was mourning the loss of a dream, they were analyzing the mechanics of the collapse. They were asking, did the market reject the product, or did we fail to communicate its value? Was the timing wrong, or was the execution flawed? What did this customer feedback reveal about our blind spots? By turning the emotional tragedy of failure into a detached, objective data-gathering mission, they disarmed the fear of making mistakes entirely. When you strip the shame and the ego away from failure, you unlock a terrifyingly powerful level of freedom. You stop playing small just to protect your reputation. You stop avoiding difficult tasks out of fear that you might look foolish. You realize that looking foolish is just the price of admission for learning anything worth knowing. Every time a strategy fails, you smile inwardly because you know you have just eliminated one more wrong path, narrowing down the field of possibilities until only the winning path remains. You become completely undefeatable because no matter how many times the world knocks you down, you never lose your sense of direction. You only gain a more precise map. Therefore, the next time things fall apart around you and the inevitable weight of a mistake presses down on your chest, refuse to let your mind turn that setback into a definition of your worth. Step back, put on your scientific lab coat, look at the wreckage with cold, clear-eyed curiosity, and extract every ounce of data you can from the experience, knowing that the very thing that just broke your plan is actually building the unbreakable wisdom that will secure your ultimate victory. There is a subtle, insidious trap that swallows up millions of ambitious, well-meaning people every single day, and it has nothing to do with a lack of talent, a lack of intelligence, or a lack of desire. This trap is the overwhelming weight of the future. When we decide to build something extraordinary, whether it is a business, a career, a physical transformation, or a life of deep purpose, our minds naturally look out at the vast expanse between where we are today and where we want to be. We look at the sheer scale of the mountain, the distance to the summit, and the countless unpredictable storms that we know we will have to weather along the way. That panoramic view of the future is often paralyzing. The brain looks at the sheer magnitude of the requirement and immediately calculates that the energy cost is too high. It whispers that the peak is too far away, that the odds are too long, and that we are too small to ever make a meaningful dent in the universe. We become victims of macro anxiety, suffocated by the heavy realization of how much work remains to be done, how many problems remain unsolved, and how many days of grueling execution stand between our current reality and our ultimate vision. The mentally tough, the ones who achieve legendary resilience and refuse to give up, understand a fundamental law of human execution that completely neutralizes this paralysis. They know that nobody ever climbs a mountain by staring at the peak. If you stand at the base of Everest and spend all your time looking up at the freezing, wind-whipped summit thousands of feet above you, you will either lose your nerve and turn around, or you will take a misstep because you fail to look at the ground directly beneath your boots. The people who reach the top of impossible mountains do not ignore the summit, but they do not live there mentally either. They master the art of radical reduction. They shrink their entire universe down to a microscopic scale. When the conditions are brutal, the wind is howling, and every muscle in their body is screaming in agony, they do not ask themselves how they are going to survive the next 6 months. They do not worry about the weather next week or the final stretch of the climb. They ask themselves one single localized question: what is the absolute next step I need to take right now? To truly understand the power of this approach, you have to look at how human psychology actually processes progress. The brain cannot emotionally process a decade of work. It cannot feel the victory of a milestone that is 5 years away. When you try to force your mind to digest an entire lifetime of achievement all at once, you create a massive cognitive bottleneck. You experience burnout before you have even laced up your shoes because you are trying to carry the weight of the entire journey on your shoulders on day one. Mental toughness is not about having the endurance to carry a mountain. It is about having the discipline to drop the mountain and pick up a single stone. You look at the massive, terrifying project ahead of you, and instead of letting it paralyze you, you slice it down into pieces so small, so manageable, and so ridiculous that it becomes physically impossible to fail at them. You stop trying to write a book and focus entirely on writing a single sentence. You stop trying to build a multi-million-dollar enterprise and focus entirely on making one phone call, sending one email, or solving one immediate problem right in front of you. When you shift your focus from the macro vision to the micro action, something extraordinary happens to your psychology. The anxiety begins to evaporate. The crushing weight of the future lifts, replaced by the quiet, steady rhythm of the present moment. You realize that you never actually have to live through a difficult year, a grueling month, or an intimidating week. You only ever have to live through this one single moment. And you only ever have to execute this one single task. Can you make this one phone call?
Yes.
Can you write this one paragraph? Yes. Can you survive this one workout? Yes. By anchoring your entire consciousness to the immediate present, you disarm the fear of the unknown. You stop worrying about whether you have what it takes to finish the race, and you simply focus on putting one foot in front of the other with absolute unbroken integrity. The future takes care of itself when the present is handled with total mastery. Consider how this principle changes your relationship with failure and overwhelm. When things go wrong, when a massive obstacle appears out of nowhere and threatens to derail months of planning, the untrained mind panics because it evaluates the entire structure collapsing. The mentally tough mind simply narrows its focus. It says, okay, that strategy failed. The big picture just got messy. Let's ignore the big picture for a second. What is the very next right action I can take right now to reclaim a fraction of control? They find the smallest possible lever, apply pressure to it, and then look for the next one. They string together a sequence of microscopic victories, day after day, week after week, month after month, until those tiny, insignificant steps compound into monumental achievements that look like miracles to everyone watching from the outside. People will look at their success and call it overnight genius, completely blind to the thousands of tiny, unglamorous, micro decisions that nobody saw. Therefore, the next time you feel overwhelmed by the sheer magnitude of your goals, the next time you look at the calendar and feel a cold wave of panic wash over you because you are so far away from where you want to be, stop. Close your eyes to the horizon, stop looking at the summit, and bring your vision all the way down to the dirt right in front of your feet. Strip away the years, the months, and the weeks until you are left with just one single, concrete action that you can take in the next 5 minutes. Do that one thing with absolute excellence. Then, when it is done, find the next one and do it again. By refusing to let the future intimidate you, and by surrendering completely to the power of the immediate next step, you build a relentless momentum that cannot be stopped by any obstacle, because no matter how big the mountain is, it can only ever be climbed one step at a time. There is a profound misconception about how true champions, enduring builders, and unbreakable individuals maintain their dominance over the long arc of time. We often look at people who consistently win in business, in art, in leadership, or in personal discipline, and we imagine they possess some secret reservoir of unstoppable energy, a magical well of eternal inspiration that never runs dry, or a superhuman immunity to the fatigue that plagues everyone else. We assume that because they keep winning, they must experience some continuous, effortless state of joy and momentum where everything flows smoothly and victories stack up like building blocks. But if you strip away the polished public image and look at the raw, unfiltered reality of human existence, you find a completely different truth. The people who keep winning are not the ones who never get tired, who never face devastating losses, or who never feel the crushing temptation to walk away. They are simply the ones who have mastered the art of persistence through a deep, systematic understanding of how lasting mastery is actually forged. To understand this, we have to look closely at what consistency really means. Most people treat consistency as a flat, monotonous line of predictable effort. They think being consistent means showing up every single day with the exact same level of enthusiasm, the exact same high energy, and the exact same flawless execution. When life inevitably disrupts that illusion, when they get sick, when an emergency happens, when a project fails miserably, or when they wake up feeling completely hollow and uninspired, they experience a jarring shock to their system. They look at their broken streak, decide they have failed at being consistent, and use that temporary disruption as a convenient excuse to abandon the pursuit entirely. They treat persistence like a fragile piece of glass that shatters the moment it takes a hit. The mentally tough, however, view persistence not as a fragile line of perfection, but as an elastic, unbreakable fabric that stretches, bends, absorbs massive shocks, and always snaps back to its original tension. They know that persistence has very little to do with how you feel on your best days, and everything to do with what you do on your absolute worst days. Think about the nature of a river cutting through solid stone over thousands of years. A river does not carve a deep canyon through brute force or explosive, violent floods that happen once a decade. In fact, raging floods often cause chaotic destruction rather than precise, lasting transformation. What cuts the canyon is the relentless, unyielding drop-by-drop persistence of the water. Even on days when the flow is slow, when the draught lowers the water level to a trickle, the water is still there, still pressing against the rock, still doing the quiet, unglamorous work of erosion. The rock does not yield because of a single massive blow. It yields because the water refuses to stop showing up. Mentally tough people internalize this law of gradual, unyielding attrition. They understand that most human achievements are not the result of a single monumental breakthrough, but rather the compounding interest of thousands of tiny, seemingly insignificant choices made day after day, year after year, long after the applause has faded and the initial excitement has turned into mundane routine. When you look at persistence through this lens, the entire psychological pressure of winning shifts dramatically. You stop trying to force massive, unsustainable bursts of heroic effort, and you start focusing entirely on building a rhythm that you can sustain when things get dark. You realize that a bad day, a messy execution, or a flawed week does not reset your progress to zero unless you let it. The person who keeps winning is not the one who never stumbles or falls flat on their face. It is the one who refuses to stay on the ground. When they are knocked down by an unexpected crisis, they do not waste precious energy lying in the dirt, complaining about the unfairness of the blow or lamenting how hard things have become. They pull themselves up, dust themselves off, and immediately take the next smallest possible action to get back in motion. They know that momentum is like a fire. If you let it go out completely, it takes an immense amount of painful friction to start it up again from cold ash. But if you keep a single ember glowing by doing just a fraction of the work, keeping your mind focused on the core mission, even when execution is subpar, you preserve the heat necessary to roar back to full power the moment conditions improve. This unyielding commitment to persistence fundamentally changes how you view obstacles and setbacks on your journey. When an obstacle appears, it is no longer interpreted as a permanent barrier designed to keep you out, but rather as an endurance test designed to weed out everyone who only wanted the prize without paying the toll. The mentally tough look at a brutal market, a fierce competitor, or a grueling personal trial and smile inwardly, knowing that every single day they stay in the arena while others quit out of exhaustion. Their relative position strengthens exponentially. They know that attrition is the ultimate filter of human endeavor. Most people do not lose because they lack the intelligence or the capability to succeed. They lose because they quit too early in the game. They surrender in the messy middle, right before the inflection point where all their compounding efforts would have finally exploded into visible success. By refusing to quit, by treating every single obstacle as a temporary puzzle to be solved rather than a permanent verdict on their potential, they outlast the storm. Therefore, if you want to build a life of enduring achievement, you must completely re-engineer your relationship with time, consistency, and adversity. Stop looking for quick wins, instant validation, or a smooth path where the wind is always at your back. Accept the reality that the road to anything truly magnificent is littered with fatigue, doubt, and unexpected suffering. When those heavy seasons arrive, and they surely will, do not look for a magical escape hatch or wait for your feelings to align with your responsibilities. Anchor yourself to your deepest clarity, break the massive mountain down into a single step,